Oliver Fowle was returning home from important negotiations, and his business-class car confidently drove along the road while the businessman looked out the window and thought about the events of the past day. Unfortunately, the deal he had been counting on with foreign partners almost fell through. The companions abruptly changed the terms of the contract they were about to conclude. Oliver barely managed to resolve the issue, but he only bargained for himself a little more time before he had to give them a final answer. At the traffic light, Oliver involuntarily rubbed his face with his hands, as if trying to wash away all his worries and concerns for the future of the company. Oliver was only 28, and he had already the head of a media empire with several offices in the country. Naturally, foreign partners immediately became more active, wanting to get a bigger piece of the pie in such a profitable enterprise. So Oliver almost had to sleep at work, trying to put things in order. The most frustrating thing for Oliver was that he didn't have a soulmate to help him switch from all the difficulties of the work process to love and the joy of relationships. It wasn't because someone betrayed Oliver or he went through some painful breakup. No, the young businessman just didn't want to engage in what he called empty relationships. The fact was that Oliver, by his nature, had always been a very deep and devoted person, and he expected the same from his future significant other. But it was not easy to meet such a girl, and it was boring to settle for less. And to tell the truth, Oliver was not in the mood for love and romance right now. The business recently handed over to him by his parents was a heavy burden on his shoulders. He had to orient himself literally on the go. Although his father tried to convey to him the key parameters of running the family business. However, as soon as Oliver took up the job himself, he immediately realized that the company needed a global update. Much of what his father practiced in his business had become obsolete and required a complete revision of the main management concept and the conduct of all internal processes of the firm. Meanwhile, his parents constantly pressured Oliver, especially his mother. Mrs. Fowle definitely wanted to marry her son soon, and to a girl from a very famous and high-ranking family. "Oliver, dear, are you sure you don't want to go with us to the golf club this weekend?" she asked meaningfully. "Sarah Clark and her parents will be there. She returned from London this year." "Yes, just imagine, she graduated with a bachelor's degree there. Now the girl is a master of arts. In my opinion, she's a perfect match for you. You definitely need to take a look at her." "Mom, you're at it again," Oliver sighed heavily. "I made it crystal clear to you and Dad that I'm not ready for a relationship yet, and I certainly don't want to consider any options. You know that I'm going to get married like a normal person for love, and to someone I choose myself." "Oliver, my son," exclaimed his mother, "by the time you choose a wife, your father and I will have aged. You're almost 30 now. It's time to think about starting a family and building your own nest. I understand you don't have much time, having devoted yourself entirely to the family business, but we want to make it easier for you to choose. Trust me, you can rely completely on your mother. I'll find you a girl from the best family." "Mom, I said no," exclaimed Oliver, feeling irritated. "Don't meddle in my life. I can handle it perfectly well on my own." "I understand," said Mrs. Fowle dryly. "You want to leave us without heirs and act like the biggest egoist, right? But what if something happens to you suddenly like your reckless brother, and you leave us with your father? Do you think we can survive that? Do you think I can?" Mrs. Fowle began to cry loudly, and poor Oliver had to apologize for his outburst and comfort her. "Mom, please calm down. Don't worry about me like that. I was unforgivably rude to you. I'm sorry, but you know how hard it is for me to work in Dad's company. That's something Matt should have been doing." "But he's gone now," said the woman through tears. "Now you, Oliver, are our last hope. I won't survive the death of another son. And of course I want you to have children, and for us and your father to have grandchildren, so that the sound of little children's feet can be heard in our house again." Oliver then hugged his mother tightly and managed to calm her down with difficulty. Matt was 2 years older than him and was preparing from childhood to lead his father's empire. Oliver always admired how much effort and perseverance his brother put into becoming a worthy leader. Matt studied a lot and constantly tried to take additional courses to master one skill or another that would be useful to him in business. But all of that changed when Matt started drinking about a year ago. The older brother suddenly lost interest in everything, burned out, and seemed not to know what to do with his life. When he was asked, Matt would answer evasively, saying that the vector of his interests in life had changed, but he didn't specify in which direction it had changed. Instead, his brother locked himself in their home library with a bottle of whiskey and consumed one glass of spirit after another for hours on end. Oliver still felt guilty about his brother's death. Perhaps if they had raised the alarm earlier and thought earlier about how to help him, Matt would still be alive. Instead, Oliver tried to stay away from his brother, thinking that he was going through some kind of personal crisis, and that Matt was a mature, self-sufficient person who could handle it on his own. The investigation determined at the time that it wasn't intentional. Matt simply fell asleep at the wheel because of the huge amount of alcohol he had drunk before the trip, but who knows how it really happened. However, Oliver perceived this tragedy as a sign from above. He sincerely believed that his deceased brother was trying to reach out for help from him and their parents in this way, but no one heard him. The loss was a great struggle for Oliver, his mother, and his father. Oliver even underwent several courses of psychotherapy to cope with the pain inside him. He could not accept the senseless and terrible death of his brother. Therefore, he admitted to himself that he needed help and went to a specialist. Matt passed away 7 months ago, so the topic of his death was still very painful for Oliver. The young man often visited his brother's grave at the ceremony and talked to him for a long time, asking him forgiveness for his own frivolity and unwillingness to see problems at that time. So when his mother unintentionally began to manipulate and pressure him through the image of his deceased brother, it became challenging for Oliver to contain his resentment and anger. He already felt constant pressure from his father, who literally controlled every step he took, and now his mother was pressuring him to get married. Partly for this reason, he immersed himself so fervently in the business that fell entirely on his shoulders. When Matt was alive, Oliver did not even think about taking over his father's company. The guy dreamed of dedicating his life to art. He planned to open his art gallery in the city and exhibit young and promising artists whose talent could decorate the living room or hall of some famous person in the future. His parents often teased their younger son about this. "Oh, Oliver, you're not like us," his father would say. "You'd better take an example from your older brother. Look, Matt is already managing a branch, so to speak, and is seriously involved in our business. And you're just playing around with pictures." "So maybe it's for the best," the son would object with a smile. "We already have one brother who is a businessman in our family. Let there be another brother who is a well-known gallery owner throughout the city. I'm not drawn to all these media things, Dad." "Oh, then you're wrong, son," his mother replied instead of his father. "We live in a world where you can't live without your own solid business. What will you do with these paintings if no one buys them?" "But you could use your skills for your father's firm. Didn't we spend so much money on your education for nothing?" Oliver clenched his teeth at that conversation, but said nothing to his mother. He was unable to explain to them his attraction to painting, rather than to documents about endless financial reports. But one way or another, he still had to head the company instead of Matt. And now, he was learning the basics of management every day, applying his creative skills for the good of the family business. Matt cannot be brought back, no matter how painful and offensive it may be to Oliver and his parents. As for marriage, he made it clear to his father and mother that he would not hurry. "When the time comes, I will meet my true love, the girl with whom I want to spend my life," Oliver told his parents. "You will definitely be the first to know about it." He was still sitting behind the wheel of his car, looking at the summer sun setting over the horizon. A warm breeze blew through the open window into the car, which brought the young man out of his reverie. The businessman was just driving over a wide bridge over a small river when he saw something strange. Oliver thought someone was in the water, as the water's surface was unnaturally rising and falling. Looking around, he noted that none of the drivers were stopping, so Oliver stopped by the roadside and walked to the bridge railing. Looking closely, the young man realized that he was not mistaken. In the water, a young woman was desperately fighting the current, just a few meters below him. "Damn it!" Oliver cursed to himself, and without hesitation took off his shoes and jacket, then dived into the river's depths after the unfortunate girl. The water was murky, but the man quickly found the stranger going down. Having picked her up with one hand under his armpits, Oliver began to paddle desperately in order to get to the surface with the woman. This proved to be no easy feat, as the current that the girl was trying to overcome was so strong that it almost carried the businessman to the opposite side of the riverbank. Oliver barely managed to keep his bearings. However, having practiced a lot at school with a team of swimmers, he still managed to cope with the water element. When they finally managed to struggle into the shore, the girl regained consciousness a little. She looked at her savior with gratitude. She slowly stood up. Her clothes were soaked through, but she still managed to give Matt a weak smile. "Thank you," she stuttered. "If it weren't for you, we would have been lost forever with Alf." The businessman, trying to catch his breath, looked at her with amazement. "With Alf?" he asked, puzzled. "Who is Alf?" At first, Oliver thought that the poor girl had lost her mind from the stress, but then he noticed her hands pressing against her chest, and suddenly, in the middle of the deserted shore under the bridge, a quiet, plaintive whimpering was heard, and Oliver saw a tiny, barely a month-old puppy in the girl's hands. "So, you jumped into the water for that, did I get it right?" Oliver exclaimed in anger. "You jumped in for a puppy, right?" "Well, yes." The girl, trembling with cold, nodded. "Some creep threw it right in front of me into the water, just like that. He pulled it out of his bag and—" Memories brought her to tears again. It was only then that Oliver noticed the girl's protruding belly under her wet clothes. She was pregnant, and it looked like she was already quite far gone. "Are you out of your mind?" The man yelled at her in shock. "Are you wanting to die? And what if all three of you had drowned? Okay, maybe you don't care about yourself, but what about your child?" The unfortunate woman modestly lowered her big light blue eyes and continued to hold and stroke the whimpering puppy, who was scared and cold. She herself was as pale as the first snow. Seeing how her lips began to turn blue, Oliver realized that she was on the brink of collapse. It was impossible to get anything from her in this condition. Therefore, Oliver decided to take her to his summer house first so that she could warm up and fully recover. "What's your name?" he asked. The girl raised her big eyes at him again. "Melinda. Melinda Smith," she replied shortly. "Okay, well, Melinda Smith," Oliver sighed. "Get in my car. I'll take you to my place, give you some hot tea. You can rest there and figure out what to do next." She nodded briefly and got into the car. The puppy, of course, stayed with her, shaking his head. Oliver closed the door behind him and immediately turned on the heater in the car so that the girl could drive faster, even though it was summer after being in the water, especially while pregnant. Some extra warmth wouldn't hurt. The summer house where Matt was going to take Melinda used to be their family's, but in the last couple of years, only Matt had been going there. The young man explained to his younger brother that he went to the countryside to recharge his energy and take a break from civilization. Matt could live at the house for weeks and then come back full of energy and ready to dive into the family business. However, before his brother's death, he wasn't even interested in this. After Matt's death, the summer house passed to Oliver, and he sometimes went there in memory of his brother. His parents couldn't bring themselves to go there. Too many memories were associated with this place in Matt's childhood. In addition, Oliver understood perfectly well that he could not bring Melinda to his parents' house. They simply would not understand. A poorly dressed girl soaking wet, holding a street puppy, and the last months pregnant. It's easy to imagine what a terrible picture would have formed in their minds. During the entire time they were driving, Oliver and Melinda barely exchanged a few words. Melinda mostly remained silent and behaved modestly. Oliver, however, carefully watched the road as it was starting to get dark rapidly. He occasionally glanced at the girl out of the corner of his eye. She was beautiful and fragile with thick, light chestnut hair. Melinda could have been a true lady if she weren't for her poor clothing, clearly purchased at a second-hand store. Her excessive paleness and thinness indicated that she was either a beggar or a poor girl. The man had learned from their short conversation that Melinda had been raised in an orphanage, had mostly been left to her own devices throughout her life. She had no relatives, and when asked if she had a husband or fiancé, she did not answer. "I'm sorry, that's a sensitive topic for me," she explained to Oliver. Oliver did not insist and left the girl alone. When they arrived at the summer house, something strange happened. Upon seeing the place, Melinda looked at Oliver in surprise, but did not say anything aloud. Oliver thought she had probably never seen such a large country house before, and just nodded, trying to find the key to the front door in his pocket. "This is ridiculous," he muttered to himself, patting all his pockets. "Where could I have put it?" "Did you lose something?" the girl asked politely. "Yes, the key. I must have lost it while I drove into the river after you." Oliver remembered that the key had been in his breast pocket of his shirt, and now it wasn't there. In the end, he shook his head despondently. "There's nothing to be done. I guess I'll have to climb in through the window." Melinda watched her rescuer closely, but when he was about to break a small window on the first floor leading to the pantry, the girl stopped him. "Oliver, don't bother. Let me open it with my key." Then Melinda shifted the puppy to her opposite shoulder. The puppy only let out a small whine in his sleep as she pulled out a thin cord from under her shirt. It was the same key as the one Oliver had. It was clearly not a duplicate or a hastily made fake. Oliver was ready to swear that this key was absolutely authentic. With a confident gesture, Melinda turned it in the lock 3 times, and then there was a characteristic soft click and the door opened. "What's going on here?" Oliver recoiled from her in shock. "How did you get this key?" Melinda looked at him calmly, then said, "Oliver, please don't worry. Let's have some tea together and I'll tell you everything." "I would really like that," he replied seriously. Half an hour later, when the young couple had brewed hot, fragrant herbal tea in cups, Melinda confessed, "Oliver, the thing is, I was Matt's fiancée before he died." "What?" The man couldn't help but react emotionally. "How is that possible? Why didn't we hear anything about this?" The girl just smiled bitterly. "Matt was afraid of your family's reaction. He said you valued your reputation in society very highly. Who needs a daughter-in-law who practically lives in the property?" It took Oliver a few seconds to process what he had heard. Wait, how did you two meet?" he asked. "Matt accidentally ran into me and saved me," the girl explained, sighing. "I was standing near the supermarket and begging for alms because no one wanted to hire me for work. Some rich guys started harassing me. They wanted to take me somewhere in their car. Of course, when you have money, breaking the law isn't a problem." Melinda's hands trembled at the memory of that day. And then Matt appeared out of nowhere and drove off those scumbags. "That's how we met. We used to meet at my apartment, and we loved each other very much." "And how long have you been together?" asked a stunned Oliver. "Almost a year," she replied, looking him straight in the eye. Oliver could tell from her gaze that Melinda was telling the truth. She really was his brother's fiancée. "Matt wanted to marry me, but he was afraid to tell his father. He thought that he would be disinherited out of anger," said Melinda nervously. At that moment, Oliver noticed how much she started to worry and twist her own fingers. "Calm down, please," Oliver asked her quietly and covered her hand with his. "Tell me, did you know that my brother had an alcohol addiction?" Melinda held a long, questioning gaze at the man, after which tears appeared in her eyes. "Yes, but I tried. I really tried to stop him." The girl spoke out. "He started drinking when I became pregnant. He couldn't figure out how to bring me home and introduce me to you. It was because of this, that is, because of me, he died." Melinda couldn't hold back and crying covered her face with her hands. "You cannot blame yourself for his death," Oliver tried to calm her. "Nobody is to blame for what happened to my brother. I just couldn't understand for a long time what happened to him. Why did he suddenly start drinking?" The young man looked carefully at the guest. "But now I understand. Matt was simply ashamed of us. He was ashamed of us in front of you. My parents and I are probably snobs to some extent, and my brother didn't want you to face it again. He didn't want to hurt you and your child." Oliver leaned back in his chair. Finally, everything became clear to him. The situation became clear, but one thing the young man could never understand. "Why didn't you come to see us when Matt was gone? You surely needed help, and with money, as I understand it, it became very difficult after my brother's death." Sobbing, Melinda replied, "Well, what do you think? Look at me. I'm telling you I'm poor and pregnant. How do you imagine that? Could I come to your house and say that Matt was almost my husband and we wanted to get married? Your parents should have thrown me out like a strained dog." Melinda slightly pointed to the key to the summer house. "Matt brought me here. He wanted to be with me in nature. That's when he gave me this key. He said that I could come here any time. But of course, I never appeared here in his absence. And for some reason I kept the key, perhaps as a memory of Matt. I hung it on a cord and now wear it instead of an amulet." The girl carefully stroked the key and weakly smiled. Who would have thought that it would still be useful? Oliver was in complete confusion. Of course, he couldn't leave this girl in trouble, especially since she was carrying his nephew in her heart. "Melinda, listen," the man began. "Stay here for now. I will bring you and the baby everything you need, food and vitamins. Just don't leave, please." Melinda looked at him questioningly. "You won't bother anyone here," Oliver assured her. "I won't tell my parents anything for now. They don't come here themselves. You're right. I really need to think about how to tell them this news. But I want you and the puppy to stay here until I figure out how to introduce you to the family. I'm sure my parents will be happy to find out they will soon have a grandson, as they have been dreaming about it." Melinda looked at him, and from the expression in her eyes, the man understood that she didn't believe in the success of an idea. However, the woman agreed. What else could she do? She couldn't go back to the street and be homeless again. Once, she finally said, "I'll try to behave quietly so that the neighbors don't suspect anything." After that, she prepared a simple dinner for them, and then Oliver drove back. From that moment on, Oliver began to take care of Melinda. He visited the summer house almost every day secretly. He brought food, vitamins, and fruits, and of course, food and treats for little Alf, whom Melinda practically never let out of her arms. The woman's poverty did not embarrass the young businessman at all. He felt that she emitted an inner energy and beauty in the literal sense. Oliver was amazed at her endurance and optimism. After all, Melinda waited until the last moment and endured the indecisiveness of his late brother, hoping that he would still dare to go against the will of the parents and make Melinda his lawful wife. In a wonderful way, Oliver felt comfortable with this brave woman. When he asked her age, he was greatly surprised to learn that she was only 23 years old. Matt was much older, and therefore would have taken full responsibility, but for some reason he couldn't complete what he had planned. As it turned out, the businessman's older brother was only decisive and confident at work, but in his personal life, he fell victim to his own prejudices. Oliver couldn't help feeling sad about this. At the same time, Oliver's parents began to suspect that something was wrong with their son. They feared that Oliver would suffer the same fate as the older brother. So they decided to urgently find out what he was hiding at their old summer house. What if he's drinking there like Matt, or doing something worse? Mrs. Fowle sobbed. "It doesn't seem likely," Mr. Fowle shook his head. "Oliver wouldn't behave like that. He even consulted a psychologist about it. He hasn't been able to tolerate alcohol since his brother passed away." "But who knows what could happen?" his wife exclaimed. "Today he's not drinking, but what about tomorrow?" "Matt went there just like that, and what? No, darling, let's go there. My heart tells me an unpleasant surprise is waiting for us there." A few days later, deep in the evening, they arrived at the summer house at the moment when Oliver had already left Melinda and the puppy. Upon arrival, the wealthy couple witnessed a very strange and incomprehensible scene. A pregnant young woman, very similar to a beggar, was sitting on the porch and chewing an apple. In addition, a flea-bitten mutt was spinning around her feet. "And what are you doing here in our house?" Mrs. Fowle asked, emerging from the shadows. The voice of Oliver's mother was quiet, but it was the calm before the storm. With each subsequent word, the thunder in her intonations grew, risking turning into a real scream. Why is some stranger staying at my house overnight? Who gave you the keys? Oliver, confess immediately, you cunning creature. Mrs. Fowle's eyes burned with righteous anger, and even her husband couldn't stop her. You all misunderstood. Melinda tried to explain the situation to them. Oliver allowed me to stay here and have my baby. I'm pregnant with your oldest son, Matt's child. Melinda's voice trembled, but she had found the strength to tell the truth as it was. However, Mrs. Fowle's face was distorted with a grimace of terrible anger. What? How dare you involve my boy in your debauchery? Matt would never have done anything to do with such a raggedy woman like you. Don't you have any conscience? Maggie, why did you get so angry? Mr. Fowle tried to calm his wife down. Girl, you must really better leave this house, said the man to Melinda, and looked expressively at her. Get out of here, shameless woman. Mrs. Fowle screamed as if exploding. The neighbors in the neighboring houses involuntarily woke up and turned on their lights. Scandals in the sleepy village were quite rare. Crying from humiliation and offense, Melinda quickly gathered her humble belongings, took Alf with her, and disappeared into the darkness of the summer night. No, she didn't expect any sympathy from them. This meant that her dear Matt was right. Her parents were indeed incredibly biased. Perhaps we were too cruel to the girl, Mr. Fowle tried to defend Melinda. Are you going to say something else in her defense? The wife looked at him menacingly. The elderly man was embarrassed and silently drove his wife back home. There, they were met by a worried Oliver who had been holding onto his phone for 3 hours, trying to reach his parents. Mom, Dad, where have you been? I was anxious about you, the son said, looking at them in bewilderment as they entered the hall. Well, son, I must admit you've disappointed me, his mother began slowly. We were at our summer house. Oliver turned pale. He immediately understood what his mother had found out about everything. Ah, as I see you know that there's some stranger with her dog living there, Mrs. Fowle exclaimed, and began to berate her son slowly. What did you do with Melinda, Mom? Oliver asked coldly. I did what was necessary. I kicked her out onto the street, his mother replied proudly, raising her chin. You've lost your mind. Oliver couldn't hold back. She's in her last months of pregnancy. She could give birth at any moment. The young man argued with his mother, explaining that this woman had a direct connection to their family. However, Mrs. Fowle just laughed in response. Who are you listening to, son? Wake up. People like her are willing to deceive anyone for housing and a piece of bread in the city. Do you really think she could have been your brother's fiancée? She had a key to the house, Mom, Oliver explained, barely containing his anger. And yes, I believe her. We talked a lot about my brother. Mrs. Fowle narrowed her eyes like a cobra about to strike. You just don't understand, she hissed. How do we know now that she's carrying Matt's child? The beggar could have been impregnated by anyone, and now I'm supposed to feed her and take care of her until she gives birth. Oh, of course, when the baby is born, we can do a DNA test, but we still have to live until then somehow. In any case, I'm not going to be at the mercy of this charlatan. With these words, Mrs. Fowle walked to her room, and Oliver's father followed her, worrying that his beloved wife's blood pressure might rise. Oliver remained standing in the living room, tormented by the sense of awkwardness and guilt. He felt in his heart that Melinda was telling the truth, and his parents had kicked an innocent woman out onto the street just before she was due to give birth. He tried to find his late brother's fiancée, but it was all in vain. Melinda had vanished and didn't answer any of Oliver's phone calls. In his attempt to reach her, he bought her the simplest phone so that he could always be in touch if something was needed. But it had been more than 2 weeks already, and Melinda hadn't answered a single phone call. Oliver began to worry when he remembered that she was due to give birth soon. After calling several maternity hospitals, the young man finally found the one where Melinda was and hurried there. In the reception room, Oliver introduced himself to the doctors as her fiancée to get to her room. I warn you, she's fragile now, the doctor told him. Your fiancée had a large baby, but she herself is quite petite. Her pelvis is very narrow, so we had to do a cesarean section. She lost a lot of blood, but fortunately she and the baby are now out of danger." At these words, Oliver felt a weight lift off his chest. Thanking the doctor, he went to Melinda. At these words, Oliver felt a weight lift off his chest. Thanking the doctor, he went to Melinda. She lay on the bed very pale, paler than when they first met with Oliver. However, when she saw her visitor, she smiled. "I didn't think we'd see each other again, Oliver." Her voice was quiet and weak, but the young man could still hear everything clearly. He rushed to her. "Melinda, forgive my mom and dad. I'm so sorry that they were rude to you." Melinda slowly shook her head. "It's not worth it. I understand everything. In their eyes, I'm a predatory con artist, dreaming of getting rich, groomed by any means. It's hard for them to believe in our feelings for Matt." "They shouldn't have kicked you out," Oliver said, gently taking her hand. "I still can't understand how they could do that to you." Then he felt the woman's hand squeeze his palm weakly in response. "Thank you, Oliver, for your support and everything else." She rewarded the man with a long glance, and at that moment he realized that he was ready to drown in those heavenly blue eyes. Realizing that there was almost no one to take care of the baby until his mother recovered after the difficult operation, Oliver tried to visit Melinda as often as possible. He hoped that she would recover faster if she felt cared for and loved. He brought everything necessary for the young mother and her baby to the maternity hospital: food, diapers, and medicine. Oliver didn't care about the money. He just wanted Tommy, that's what they named the baby, and his mother to be discharged as soon as possible. One day, Oliver was summoned by the doctor. From his concentrated expression, the man realized that something unpleasant had happened. Tommy had a heart defect. "The situation is difficult," the surgeon said. Oliver was in shock. "Is there really nothing that can be done? And when do we need to do this operation?" he asked, gathering all his strength. "No later than 6 months from now. We can't delay it at all," the doctor replied. "However, the queue for an operation may stretch for several months. We'll do the surgery as soon as it's his turn. But don't worry, it's all treatable." "But aren't newborns entitled to a quota? Are they not out of turn?" Oliver asked with doubt. "They are," the serious surgeon nodded. "But do you even realize how many children like this we have throughout the country?" "I see. Well, if you need any help from me, please let me know," said the man, trying not to think the worst. Even Oliver's mother heard that Melinda's son had a serious heart defect. She unexpectedly softened. She looked questioningly at her husband, who nodded in agreement. "You see, son, it's like this," Mrs. Fowle began with a trembling voice. "We probably should have told you everything a long time ago, but we didn't have the courage." "What is it?" Oliver looked at her, and then at his father with concern. "The thing is," his mother said slowly, "you don't know everything about your brother." Oliver felt his heart beat twice as fast. Here Mrs. Fowle intervened, feeling sorry for his wife. "Mum wants to tell Oliver that Matt, although he was our son, was not related to us by blood. We couldn't conceive a child for a long time," Mrs. Fowle explained, wiping her eyes with a handkerchief. "So we decided to adopt a child from an orphanage. We chose the one who looked the most like us and raised him. We loved Matt as our own, I swear." She pressed her hands to her chest. "And then 2 years later, you were born." "But we never felt any difference between you," his father hastened to add. "Both of you were loved equally by me and your mother. Now you know the whole truth." Oliver felt like the air in the room had suddenly run out. He had nothing to say about it except to be surprised by how they could hide from him for so many years the fact that Matt was their adopted son. "Matt himself asked us about it," Mr. Fowle explained it to Oliver. "He didn't want you to perceive him as some kind of spare person in the family. You were teenagers when he found out the truth, and he was very upset about it." "Spare person?" Oliver couldn't believe his ears. "But I adored him. I always admired him, and I wouldn't care if he was related to me or not." Oliver felt his heart pound with anger. "Mom, Dad, I understand everything, but I always loved my brother, and that will never change," he finally said. "You should have told me everything at once. All these prejudices of yours, look where they have led us all." Oliver did not hold a grudge against his parents, realizing that they did not worry about Melinda's son precisely because they knew that this grandson was not their own. However, everything changed the moment Mrs. Fowle found out that the baby was sick. When the young mother was discharged from the hospital, Oliver immediately took her to the parents' mansion. There Melinda could calmly take care of the child, and Oliver and Mrs. Fowle, thawed towards her little grandson, began to actively help her. The funniest thing was that Alf also moved into the mansion. Melinda, as it turned out, had left with one of her good acquaintances, living in a small house on the outskirts of the city, just before giving birth. Now Alf had his own beautiful house, where he loved to hide and sleep after his wild games with Melinda and Oliver. Tommy underwent surgery only a couple of months later, when the boy was strong enough for such manipulations of his heart. Melinda was distressed about her son, but thankfully, the operation was successful, and now Tommy was a healthy baby, like all the other children. All this time, the first fragile feelings were slowly tying together between Melinda and Oliver. Melinda herself did not understand why this tall, fair-haired man caused such excitement in her. Oliver was not at all like Matt, and yet, since he saved Melinda's life, the young mother felt that she was gradually falling in love with him. Oliver simply enjoyed Melinda's company, not hoping for anything more, although within him in his heart a great passion was raging. For the first time he understood that Melinda was the one he would like to spend his life with. Several more months passed before Oliver finally dared to invite Melinda on their first real date. The man was very nervous and behaved like a love-struck boy, not knowing where to invite her. Oliver suggested going to the movies. "Oh my God, I probably haven't been there for 100 years, Melinda happily replied, accepting the bouquet of beautiful white roses that Oliver had bought for her. "If you like it, I swear we'll go there every week," he warmly assured her. The date went wonderfully, and at the end of the evening the young couple could not contain their feelings and finally united in a gentle and passionate kiss. Both of them had been waiting for this for too long, so they decided that they would no longer put their lives off for later and would start loving and feeling again, here and now. Half a year later they had a beautiful, lush wedding. Little Tommy, sitting on his grandmother's lap, admired his beautiful mother, who seemed to be the happiest woman in the world that day. Oliver had never seen Melinda so radiant and healthy. Needless to say, her painful paleness and thinness had almost disappeared by that time, and she had turned from an unhappy, downtrodden girl into a charming, slender lady. Melinda easily coped with the role of the hostess, and at social events where she sometimes had to go out with her husband, she looked and behaved so dignified that she involuntarily made Oliver's parents proud of her. And then a year later, a strange event occurred on the eve of Christmas. Melinda received a very unusual letter, in which a strange couple asked her for a personal meeting. She knew that her husband had plenty of competitors in business, and going alone to unknown people could be very reckless and dangerous. After telling her husband everything, she asked him to go with her. "Of course, we'll go visit them this weekend," the husband agreed. When they arrived at the most fashionable hotel in the city, they were greeted in the hall and escorted to a luxury suite. There, a beautiful elderly couple was already waiting for Melinda and her husband. They greeted her with hugs and tears and immediately told her who she really was. "How can it be that you are my parents?" the woman asked, confused as she looked at them. "I grew up in an orphanage and don't remember anything." Mrs. Boyd, the elderly lady, wiped the tears from the corners of her eyes. "That's the thing, dear. You lived with us until you were 3, she said, shaking her head. "We were the happiest family. We had such a wonderful business. And then bad people came," added the father. "We owned a large jewelry factory that also made amber jewelry. You understand, amber was truly a deadly stone at that time. Any business that dealt with it became automatically bloody. Unfortunately, we were so naive. We thought that it wouldn't affect us. We thought that the law would be on our side, that we would be protected. But eventually we had to run away. But it was very dangerous. If we had taken Melinda with us, it would have been even more so. So we decided to leave her here, trusting her to a nanny. We didn't think we would have to hide for so long. We gave her a large sum so that you would not need anything. The nanny also had to hide for a long time, The criminals tried every way to find her and take you, and then she died suddenly, and your tracks were lost. And not only the bandits couldn't find you, but we couldn't either," Mrs. Boyd said, touching her daughter's face with tenderness. "But now, if you allow us, we will at least watch your life from a distance." "We only found out that you were alive thanks to your wedding," added Melinda's father. "When we saw your photos, we knew right away that happy girl in the photo is our daughter. You're a copy of your mother when she was young." Melinda looks at her parents with love and understanding. "You don't need to watch me from a distance. I want us to always be together now," Melinda said. "I missed so many happy years without you, and now I want to make up for everything." They hugged each other, and all four of them, including Oliver, shed many tears of happiness. As it turned out later, Melinda was the only heir to a jewelry house. The Boyds managed to keep part of their estate and business, and now they wanted to involve their only daughter and heiress in it. Of course, Melinda agreed to be part of this endeavor, but first, she needed to get the necessary education. Mrs. Fowle, upon learning who her daughter-in-law really was ecstatic and promised to help her with the child while Melinda was studying. As it turned out, they and Oliver were of the same status, which meant that their family not only lost nothing, but also gained a very valuable asset in the form of Melinda and her empire. "Lord, if I only knew that Melinda had such parents, I would never have said a word against her," scolded Oliver's mother, reproaching herself. "Oh, Mum, you still have that drop of snobbery I told you about before," Oliver said with a slight smile, leafing through the newspaper next to her. "Well, only a drop," his mother joked. "But really, I'm overjoyed that Melinda will receive an education in the field of jewelry. Just imagine what kind of future awaits your children," she said dreamily, kissing Tommy's silky hair. "Oh, Mum, the most important thing is that Melinda has a diamond heart," Oliver replied and smiled happily.